Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
It felt like a long march.
It was a long march. There was a shortcut I forgot to tell you. That's my fault. Excellent. Oh, great. Okay, so I'm going to ask the question that I always love to ask, which is what makes you so passionate about the work that you do and how it sort of shapes what we're going to be talking about today. Zach, would you start us off?
Eye contact. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. What am I passionate about? Whew. I think going back to what Deuley was saying was like this idea of equity, right? And providing opportunities for all and really making sure that there is a space for developing technology and increasing the opportunities for innovation, and that has a voice not only from the top down, from the bottom up. And so, working with the Department of Energy and particularly with this administration, looking at opportunities like Justice 40 are really something that inspire me.
Thank you so much. Hala.
Be a little longer than that?
Of course.
All right. First, thanks for having me here. Just a little background. I've been a power systems engineer and a business leader for 28 plus years, or 32, something like that. I'm the president and the founder of Electric Power Engineers, which is a consulting firm on power systems and grid analytics, and also spun out of it a software company, NRI AI, leveraging data for analytics to support consulting and utilities. I live and breathe the economics and reliability of the grid. That's what we do for a living. So for the last 12 years, and just sitting here today, my heart still races when I hear somebody talking about the challenges. It's really the challenges and being ahead and there for the industry to solve the grid holistically, which finally today we're there where we need to balance the appliances at home with the distribution, transmission, and the nuclear power plant, if I may say. And I live and breathe that. This is why I have the two companies, and my excitement to offer what I have and make it work, which is always a challenge because people are involved and technology is involved, is really what makes me wake up every morning excited to go to work.
I love that. Thank you. And Scott.
Hello, my name is Scott Martin. I'm from the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer. Some of you might have heard of SMUD. We're really one of the leaders in terms of zero carbon. We are not looking to get to net zero. We are looking to get to absolute zero in our energy supply. And we're looking to do it very quickly by 2030. So we have a very aggressive schedule, a very aggressive approach. We have a whole plan behind how to do it, but that's not really what the question was. So I'm going to talk to the question, and the question was about what makes me excited. Obviously, zero carbon makes me excited, but more importantly, what does zero carbon really do for our communities? And if you tell somebody in your community, hey, we're going to get to zero carbon, they don't light up. They're not super excited. Most people really don't understand what that means. But when you tell them, hey, we're going to deliver new jobs to the community, hey, we're going to reach out and train the workforce of the future right here in Sacramento, and we're going to make a difference with our under-resourced and underserved communities by helping them to not only be a part of the plan, but to be part of that new workforce and to take those new jobs and to benefit from all the investments we're going to make, that gets people more excited. So that's what gets me excited about my job too.
This is awesome. So when we did the panel prep call, we definitely ran over on time. So I'm gonna do my best to wrangle everybody in because we want to leave some room for questions. Yesterday, I think in one of our earlier sessions, we sort of talked about limitless cities and the concept of what that kind of means, or at least for our purposes. And for that, it's about resiliency, sustainability, equity, and accessibility, which covers a lot of the smart conversation, but there's so much more to smart cities. And so it's very exciting to talk about this from a climate change perspective or an improvement perspective through zero carbon. With that, limitless cities, that's the ultimate vision for smart city work. What opportunities do you see on the horizon that will help us reach that goal? Scott?
Yeah, I think there's so many opportunities. I think it really, could you probably summarize it, and when you're talking about utilities in cities, it's really about partnering and how we partner and what we're partnering on. I mean, so many opportunities to partner in terms of clean transportation, lots of opportunities to partner in terms of resiliency, lots of opportunities to partner in terms of capturing funding, opportunities to partner in terms of clean climate action plans. I mean, there's a host of opportunities now between cities and utilities to work together to achieve common objectives. I'll just give you one real quick example. In our area, we worked with our city very recently to target a community center, an under-resourced community that was a gathering point during difficult, community events, storms and things like that. That community center was old. It didn't have good technology. It was very inefficient. It didn't have a lot of resiliency. So we partnered with the city to target that center and make millions of dollars of investment, as well as capture a grant to help pay for it, to upgrade that facility so that it's now energy efficient, has a kitchen, it can serve meals, it can provide a resource for a place for people to go when it's too hot outside or where there's storms in the winter. And it also has battery backup, and it's going to have electric vehicle charging stations as well. So it's really a holistic approach, but it helps the city solve a problem that they saw within the community, and it helps the utility also reach its goals to try and decarbonize and support our under-resourced communities as well.
Thank you so much. Zach.
Yeah, I think going a little bit on what Scott had mentioned, it's this idea of like place-based innovation, right? And so from a federal perspective, we're trying to develop that sort of modern American industrial strategy that allows us to better develop these public-private partnerships. I think the other aspect that we really need to think about, though, is for these limitless cities and looking at zero carbon, it's how do we think about the opportunities for multiple voices to have something to say about what that looks like. And so from a federal approach, we're trying to provide funding that allows a lot of community-based programs and thoughts around what environmental justice looks like in those. And so by having them understand that they have a voice in sort of what federal funding goes to, I think it gets back to that sort of place-based innovation that allows for these limitless cities in Sacramento to maybe have the same zero carbon goal or vision, but do it a little bit differently than Dallas, Texas, or Boston, Massachusetts, or Topeka, Kansas.
Thank you. Hala.
Great. I think, as many of us know, the ways to decarbonize, the easiest one is to integrate renewables, right? This is, of course, a great opportunity, but we do it well already. We know how to do it. Buildings, energy efficiency. But I think the low-hanging fruit that we need to imagine the extent of its complexity, back to my technical background, is the grid modernization and balancing the grid to take that after you do all of these things and you're left with some challenges to reach that net zero or zero, is how you engage people. And there is a great magnitude of megawatts that we can leverage from people in their homes by engaging them. So I go back to what my colleague said. It's really the excitement and mastering and imagining how the future looks like when everybody is working together for their energy from the community up. And I agree that every community is different, and I believe we need to start plan for that today and work together for that today.
Amazing. So we've kind of touched a little bit on what's spurring this on, but let's sort of like frame the situation and really talk about the drivers here. Hala, would you start us off?
The drivers behind that initiative, of course, it's weather, it's air quality, it's all these things that we want for our people, right? For our children. You go to some areas where, I mean, not far from where my ranch is, I was driving the other day and there's that smell, and it's in Lockhart, Texas, and then it's the lulling effect, and it's the fossil fuel smell that comes with some air, right, that blows and wind. So it's these things, air quality, rising sea level that we're worried about because of climate change. It's the weather conditions and extreme events that we're worried about for the well-being of our people, our electricity. But most of all, it's really I think it's accelerated now because our government has provided also funds to allow us to do this. So you see the rising awareness of it. It's there, but now we have means to actually make it happen faster.
Excellent. I think that's a perfect segue for Zach from your perspective.
Yeah, and we are happy to provide those funds. I think with unprecedented funding through both bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, we are trying to find ways to direct that money through multiple energy technologies and identify where there are opportunities in those individual supply chains that have gaps or opportunities, realizing that a lot of the opportunities for at least manufacturing in the space that I work in my office have oftentimes been offshored. So how do we reshore a lot of that domestic manufacturing and produce the technologies that we need here to create that zero carbon future, to create those limitless cities? And I think the driver part of it is also what Deuley was saying. It's that human story coming out and the idea that media can control that, some of that story in terms of like bringing those stories to the surface.
That's really great. I mean, that kind of weaves in some stuff that we were talking about yesterday, and the importance of storytelling and narrative when we're talking about how do we get people on board, how do we get people engaged, how do we meet people where they're at. So thank you for that. Scott, I'm really looking forward to your perspective as well, because as you mentioned earlier, SMUD is really aggressive about what it wants to accomplish. So from your perspective, what's really driving this forward?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's climate change and the impacts of climate change. I think that's kind of when you talk to utility folks and other experts, that's what people are focused on, and I think that's the obvious truth. And quite frankly, in California, we've dealt with climate change, head on. I mean, it has, and climate change the impacts of climate change has really been apparent in California. I mean, we had a fire a couple of years ago that was over 1 million acres in size. I mean, that is just absolutely mind-boggling how big that is. Last year we had a fire that almost took out a large share of South Lake Tahoe, which is one of the most beautiful places. Anybody ever been out there? It's one of the most beautiful places that you can enjoy. So, I mean, the fires have been absolutely devastating. But on top of that, more importantly, I think, is the impact that really emissions and climate change have on and have continuously had for years and decades on our communities. I mean, in Sacramento, we have one of the worst air basins in the country. And on top of that, we have some of the worst childhood asthma rates in the country. I mean, we have to do something about that. And we're not alone. I mean, there's a lot of cities out there in the same situation. It's an imperative that the utility address this. We're a big source of emissions within our community. And it's well timed. We have technology now today that's capable of significantly reducing emissions. It's time that we start to do it. So it's an imperative for our communities and for the utility.
Absolutely. And I think, another thing that's really driving this is community perception of what's happening and what they really want to prioritize. Gen Z typically gets maybe talked about in a negative light, poor Gen Z, and millennials as well, and Gen X from time to time as well. But I think there's a lot of people who are more aware of what's happening from a climate perspective, who are becoming more vocal and more active at the community level, that want to see real change in their cities, and cities are listening and coming up with sustainability plans and climate change action plans in tandem with what can happen at the utility level. So it's really, I think, an exciting time for all of this, between the community, the technology, maybe some of the weather implications, sort of pushing us to this point. But I think it's a great time to get started and really, in earnest, accomplish these things. But with that, balancing, and we touched on this a little bit yesterday as well, if not this morning, but like balancing the immediate needs of a community versus what the future needs are, and preparing for future opportunities or challenges can be daunting. How are communities and utilities engaging with each other or with themselves to build cities and grids of the future? Hala?
Tail end of my first answer is really the people. We're going to need to work with the people. This is the low-hanging fruit and the most difficult one, that we need to change processes, behavior, education. It's not only important for climate change or for decarbonizing grid, but also for equity and everything related to it. And it's actually necessary technically, again, if you think about it, it's all these layers we talked about, but also the changing behavior of customer. They're having EVs, they're using more electrical appliances and other things, is also changing the way the demand is on the utility. And if we don't do anything about it, we're going to have to keep on reserve a lot of peaking generation to keep up with the random behavior. So we have to work together with the community, and it's a golden opportunity to turn this around and make it about the people being part of the organization that's going to drive this future.
Absolutely. Scott.
Yeah, I think when you think about zero carbon, the first thing that comes to mind, obviously, is energy supply. I think that's the obvious one. But I think on top of that is transportation and buildings. Buildings and transportation together, at least in Sacramento and across California, contribute far more to carbon emissions than energy supply does. Energy supply, because we don't use any coal in California, is typically fairly clean, although not zero carbon yet. But if you don't focus on buildings, you don't focus on transportation, when you're trying to get zero carbon, you've missed the biggest source of emissions. So, in terms of partnering with cities, it's all about how do we clean up those two sectors, and how do we work together to try and decarbonize those sectors. I'll give you one quick example. We partnered with the city of Sacramento to get a grant from the federal government to work on deep energy efficiency upgrades and retrofits for underprivileged, underserved areas within our community. We were fortunate to win the grant, and now we're going to be spending $3 million to decarbonize and electrify homes, again, in the most underserved areas and parts of our service area. And that only happens when you have a focus from the city and the utility on decarbonizing buildings. You have to have that focus, and you have to have that partnership to even have the commitment to get the grant. So it's really important to broaden the perspective beyond just energy supply and focus on the two other really key areas, buildings and transportation too.
Thank you. Zach? Or Hala, did you have something to add?
I like to add something.
Yeah. Sorry.
I like your giving examples. For the involvement of the consumer, we did a research study with the University of Florida, and just deploying electric water heaters in a few tens of thousands of homes is the equivalent of 30 megawatt battery responding to the grid, which really does not affect the consumer if they set their tolerance with saying, plus one or minus 1 degree within the temperature that I like my water heater to be set at. The challenge and the exciting part is to let consumers know that they can make a difference, which they all are engaged in, they want to. And building up as a utility or as a community rewards for disadvantaged communities. If you subscribe, and we already do that with air conditioners, if you subscribe, maybe you get some money off your bill, or your rate would look different. So there is a lot of opportunities there to do that. The critical part that I like to bring as a planner is making sure we have a way to plan this. And what was the sentence earlier from one of our people, predictive analytics, where you can inform the planners of the utility ahead of time that this is available, so they can plan their resources accordingly. So it goes back to deploying these things, but deploying them in forms or fashions that allows the system as a whole to reduce reliance on resources that can be avoided otherwise.
Thank you. Zach?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because if we're talking about like Gen Z, the idea is like they want transparency. They want to know like what we're progressing to. They want a little bit of autonomy in deciding these things, and they want to know what the impact is, right? And then don't forget about like incorporating the health aspect. So when and how utilities interact with their communities and their people, from a federal government level, I don't know. I'm originally from Texas, so shout out to Texans worldwide. Yeah. But the idea, right, is like oftentimes I think that the federal government has limited impact on local communities. What we can do is say, like, we have a certain amount of funding. It's going to be directed in this way. It's up to utilities to work with their communities and that Gen Z to bring out that transparency, to talk about progression, to talk about impact, that then really changes, like, how they see technology pushing them to a zero carbon economy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. One of the things, I mean, I'm a little spoiled in San Antonio because our municipal partners are collaborative with the city. But in other places, that's not necessarily the case. I think there's opportunities for municipalities and utilities to work together and to create, sustainability plans in tandem with each other as they do outreach in the community to roll out these plans that impact not just Gen Z, but everyone across the board. We've kind of touched, well, no, we have touched on climate change and how that is definitely impacting and driving this adoption or this aggressive plans for zero carbon. But there are other challenges that go into approaching this. So if we could maybe talk a little bit about what some of these challenges are, I think that would be really helpful for everybody to sort of just understand not just the problem that we're facing, but also what it takes to make it real. There's the solution real. Zach?
Yeah, so I think the opportunities for incorporating the digital transformation that is going to be key to a zero carbon future is really looking at one, how do we make sure that we have a sense of I don't want to use maybe equity, but equality across all the different groups that are involved in the processes that are going to change how they live their lives, whether it's electric water pumps, electric heat pumps is something we're looking at. But there's a deficit of transformers in the United States right now. We currently have a Tiger team working on how do we get more transformers, distribution transformers, or is there a new technology getting out there to form that? So I think there are multiple opportunities for us to engage. I think it's informing the public. Like I don't think anybody in here knows is that there's a huge deficit of transformers and they've gone up, 50 to 100 to 400% in the last 2 years, right? But that could impact whether or not Texas has another snowstorm that blows out their energy systems, and then we have to replace all those transformers. So I think it's just building more of that transparency around what those opportunities are, where we can use digital transformation to get to that zero carbon future.
Awesome. Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges to getting to zero carbon is really addressing sort of that last 10% of emissions. If you really look at all emissions, just investing in technology that's available today, like renewables and some storage, battery storage, you should be able to get a pretty good distance on the road toward decarbonizing your energy supply. But getting that final last bit of emissions done, that to get to absolute zero, is really what the big hurdle is right now. And getting there is really going to be a variety of things. It's really going to be about engaging with your customers. I think you mentioned earlier, having programs to engage them on the devices and investments they're already making, whether that's solar or batteries in their garage, or maybe it's an electric vehicle, or maybe it's as simple as a heat pump water heater, or maybe it's just as simple as a smart thermostat. But engaging with them on the investments that they're already making, helping them to not only see value from those investments themselves, but also feeding back to the grid and helping the grid in times of need, I think is one part of the solution, a critical part of the solution. New technologies that are coming along that extend batteries and storage capability from 4 to 6 hours to much longer periods, we see as really necessary and important and critical, as well as new kinds of generation technology like carbon capture and sequestration. I think that also has opportunities for trying to get to zero carbon. So I think getting to that last 10%, that's, I think, the biggest hurdle, but I also see a future full of opportunities there.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Hala?
I see cost as a big component. Again, we're planners helping the utilities, so not every utility has the funds or grants or a budget to do that. It's a lot of investment to do that, to change your resources to renewables, to deploy the technology, to train your people to do all of that. It's a big cost. The technology is there, whether from resources or systems and software. The difficult part is how do you make it work, and how do you change from the way we do things today to how they should be in the future. The way we plan for our grid and the way we operate our grid, we're making small increment improvements there, but we're not near where we want to be. So we have to exercise our imagination. We owe it to our children, to the future, to exercise our imagination to its fullest, to try and imagine how it looked like when batteries are so inexpensive, when there's fusion, when there's more hydrogen, when there's everything, and plan for that future and then start slowly going towards it. Otherwise, sometimes I can't sleep at night thinking that we may end up investing in infrastructure that we may regret later if we are to go too fast on this or without long-term planning. So my bottom line is change the way we plan, make it intelligent, make it predictive, but at the same time, we've got to put the North Star out there. It requires a lot of imagination.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Like energy burden and cost is going to be a huge opportunity that we can have. I think the other thing that you're getting at is like adoption of technology, right? Technology is going to be the solution to this issue, and how do we adopt it? When I was 8 years old and AOL was coming out, right? My parents didn't know how to use AOL. They don't remember the like, right? But they knew that I could hop on that computer and get in chat
I don't
rooms.
remember that.
Oh, well, for all of those who were out there around that time, right? So there's that aspect that like I think the Gen Z and the next generation are going to be the ones who are going to like help their parents and their grandparents adopt the technology that we need. And so we should lean on them, whether it's through educational programs at schools or some sort of outreach that says like, how can you get your parents to adopt X, Y, and Z technology, knowing that oftentimes the older we get, the more, I don't want to use the word conservative, but the more like less we are able to adapt to new changes in our environment. So there is that adoption potential that I think we should really look to.
I couldn't agree more with all of the things that you guys are saying, which makes me a fantastic moderator for this panel. But really, I think the user experience is also going to be changing, right? You know, right now it's not necessarily as intuitive as it could be for people to, at the consumer level, or, you know, or at the household level, really engage with some of these technologies. But I think that will shift moving forward when things become frictionless or like seamless for people. It'll be easier for multiple generations to really participate, and not just the digital natives or the people who had grown up having access to new technologies. We have just a couple more questions. Please remember to stay in your seats because we have some important lunch announcements, and be thinking about questions that you would like to ask the panelists because I will call on you. So when we're talking about cities, oftentimes we can leave rural communities out of the conversation. So what are we really doing to make sure that we're not leaving these rural communities behind? Zach?
Yeah, so the Justice 40 initiative requires that all the funding that comes out of the Department of Energy, 40% of it has to go to 40% of the benefits of those programs have to go to disadvantaged communities. So there's an entire map with multiple selection factors that identify what these disadvantaged communities are doing or where they are located, so that as we're looking at providing federal funding, it's not going just to certain areas. And so I think a lot of those are rural communities. The other aspect in terms of like looking at rural communities is it really gets back to like that digital divide, right? And leveraging technology and finding ways that we can reach those people. And I think the federal government can do a better job, but I think utilizing this Justice 40 initiative and identifying ways that we can leverage our Indian Affairs office and make sure that we're going to our rural co-ops to have these conversations and identify ways that we can help support the funding of their transition are just a few of the ways that I hope the Department of Energy continues moving down, sort of in that pathway.
Excellent, thank you. Scott?
Yeah, I think, you know, when you think about different communities, how to really engage with them, I think that in the past, utilities thought it was enough to just say, hey, we got all these incentives, here you go. And why are you not taking them? You know, they're large. They'll help pay half or more of your costs, and you'll save money. And why isn't everybody just absorbing those? And I think what we've found over time is that there's a big gap in terms of community trust of utilities and other governmental organizations. There's just a huge gap for many, many good reasons. But I think if you really want to start somewhere, you have to start with trying to build trust with the communities that you serve. And that means doing some pretty hard work, embedding yourself in the community, getting involved with the community, doing service in the community. All of us as executives at SMUD are on boards with community organizations, nonprofit organizations. We do that because we love doing it, but also because we want to be embedded in the community, hearing the community's needs, understanding what they're concerned about, where they see funding needs, so that we can really align versus just saying, hey, we got this program for you. And so what we've seen over time, and it doesn't happen immediately, you do start to build trust with the key community leaders. And then they become a voice for you in the community. And because they're already trusted, it's easy for folks to start to trust you as well. And that bridge gets created, and then you can make a real difference. Then you can really start to spend where the community wants and needs the money to be spent. And you can make the biggest impact. So it really, in my mind, starts with that effort to build the trust. And that's an organizational cultural change that has to occur to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hala.
Yeah, my answer is twofold. Same as my colleague said, good design with equity in mind means involving the people in the communities you're trying to serve in the design. We've seen many solutions fail because some other people living different type of life believe that this community will benefit from something, but we don't know. So you have to educate, train, and bring people into your design teams that are trying to find these solutions. I think this is something that sometimes is overlooked, but I heard many people talking about it during this conference. It's very important. If I want to go, so now I go to my second fold of the thing. I think each of us should do something. I'm doing something I'm proud of. The software that we spun out of Electric Power Engineers is to help digitalization and data science on top of a GIS grid. I have promised myself, I literally stood in front of a mirror and I said, look, you are going to make this available to every co-op, the smallest first. No matter what the pressure, there's a lot of pressure from the investment community that come to you and say, we won't work with you if your clients are co-ops because they don't have money. We have to change that. And thanks to government, I mean, I didn't yet reach out, but these are things when we work together from the government down to the public-private sector partnership. I am determined to do that, but I cannot tell you how hard it is because it's easier to work for the IOUs or the larger municipalities and co-ops that have the $1 million or $2 to throw at you to solve their system, but we've got to all think consciously about our duties and sort of a mini socialist thinking about these things. And I'm a big proponent of that. We have to do it together.
Awesome, thank you. I have just one more question for you all, so let's sort of maybe keep it tight so we have enough to maybe take 2 or 3 questions, but I think you started to touch on this, so I'll come to you last, Hala. But like, what are you most excited about that you're working on right now? Zach, sorry, I'm looking right at you. I should have said your name.
I think everything, because we have this Environmental Justice 40 initiative and we have such a huge focus on equity that I haven't been able to see in the government. And topping on that, I come from the Office of Advanced Manufacturing in the Department of Commerce that is looking at like next generation technologies that include energy, but also includes all other 3D printing, robotics, functional fabrics that can all sort of change how we think about transitioning to a cleaner, greener, more sustainable future.
Awesome, thank you. Scott.
I'm excited about all the money that Zach and the DOE are going to Bend in our service area. But besides that, I'm also really excited about some of the opportunities we have to new technologies that we have coming to bear, whether it's vehicle to grid or managed charging opportunities, or engaging with our customers on virtual power plants, or even on the grid scale side of new fuels or longer duration battery storage. There's a lot of different new technologies that are coming to bear that have real promise and real opportunity to move the needle on carbon reduction.
Man, this panel has been really great. We've covered servant leadership. We've talked about engagement. We've talked about funding. We've talked about new technologies. We've talked about some of the real challenges that people are facing. I am excited to hear some of your questions. So now is the time. Please raise your hand if you have questions for our panelists. There was one lady in the back. She raised her hand first.
Hi, thank you so much for your very insightful discussion. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about any concepts or technologies that you're excited about that touch on circular economy, so conservation or reuse of natural resources or materials.
Yeah, thank you. So we have a battery recycling grant. I think everybody in here probably has at least 2 or 3 phones somewhere in a closet somewhere that are just sitting there, right? We haven't really developed the technology or the capability to recycle all of the batteries that we have just for cell phones. So you can imagine in 5, 10, or even currently, like all of the electric vehicle batteries that are out there. So one of the things that we have a particular funding announcement, or we're going to have a funding announcement on, is how do we build a circular economy around batteries, so, whether it be consumer electronics or vehicles. That's just one.
Yeah, we have been looking at longer duration energy storage beyond the lithium-ion battery approach that most people are using today. And one of our partners is looking at or is producing iron flow batteries at this point that could last up to 10 to 12 hours versus, say, the 4 to 6 that are available today. So not days yet, but still much longer duration than what we currently have on the market. And those batteries are nearly entirely recyclable at the end of their life. And that's and they operate at much lower temperatures than the batteries that are available today. Both those aspects, the safety aspect and the recyclable aspect, really are massive improvements over where we are right now with batteries.
Not exactly in terms of recycling or reusing, but very importantly, I'm excited about working with our clients on the predictive analytics to extend the life cycle of the assets that we have. And I think we can do that. The power lines that are out there, the batteries we're using, use those more in a way that we can orchestrate everything else, including the consumer and the other resources in the grid, so that we can keep that conductor online or that transformer and extend their lifetime. And I think that's very, very important for our environment and our economy.
Absolutely. One of the things to consider too, I think, is, we've got some changes happening in the manufacturing sector and what wants to come maybe to the U.S. In terms of supply chains being more localized. I think the circular economy is going to be a bigger conversation around that when it becomes part of our backyard, and what we're doing to source those materials and how we're going to deal with them at the end of their life cycles. And maybe the longevity of our devices and things might extend as a result, as well as our ability to repair and replace or reuse in unique ways. We have time for maybe one more question. Oh, okay, great.
Hey, thanks. So regarding the focus on technology, the 50-year updates to the MIT Limits to Growth study continue to indicate that technology will in fact not save the day, largely because it does perpetuate the otherwise business as usual scenario of infinite growth. How would you respond to that?
Boom.
To my son about that last night. my son isn't one of the millennials that is so worried about those things, and I'm going back and forth saying I'm torn between equity and the metaverse and all of that. But truly, it's an existential question. But how can you stop the technology? It's here. We've got to solve it and deal with it.
I somewhat agree with you, but I think I disagree in the sense that I haven't seen in the decades that I've been in this business, I won't say how old I am, but I've been around for a little while in this business, and I have yet to see a time, except for now, where you've got real alignment between local policy making, federal policy making, utilities, customers, businesses. You have alignment kind of across the board with all the key and right players to make a big difference in terms of carbon reduction. And I haven't necessarily seen that alignment in the past. And I think that alignment is bringing to bear more resources, more investment, more focus on solving the problems, the big problems that we have in getting to zero carbon than we have ever before. And I think that alone, that alignment and that momentum and that commitment, as long as it sticks around long enough, can solve the problem.
And I just want to add, I remember our conclusion, it was at 2 a.m. yesterday. It was, it's good to have a free economy and a decoupled competition between resources, but regulatory is going to be very important to curb that, let's say, exponential or out of control phenomenon that we might see. So we really need regulatory to be informed, be able to put some metrics in place for us.
Zach, anything to add?
Yeah, and I just think that technology also can be used for good, right? And so if we, going back to what Deuley said, leverage that to bring out the human story, that can change how people incorporate technology and use technology for growth for groups that were otherwise underrepresented or disadvantaged in those situations to come to a cleaner, greener, zero carbon economy.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things, I have a background doing some stuff with startup companies, and so new technologies and disruptive models and things like that always come about. And I think balancing the need for investment and funding in those new technologies, but creating a system in which maybe our incentives are more aligned, because the startups aren't necessarily motivated by long-term strategy, right? Like they maybe necessarily want to have explosive growth, returns of investment, maybe have an exit. And if you're building disruptive technologies purely for an exit that somebody else is going to manage and buy, you have to really look at who's buying what and what's happening to those disruptive technologies that are they making it to market? Are they really interrupting these paradigms? And if we don't maybe change that system too, we're not necessarily going to see the progress that we want to see. With that, let's give a round of applause to our panelists, please. Stay in your seats. We have announcements for lunch, please. Thank you.